Emily had no idea how she ended up in this mess. One moment, she was just a regular Earth girl, trying to make it through another boring high school day, and the next, she was the chosen one in an intergalactic cultural exchange program. She wasn't even sure what that meant, but it sounded important enough for her to end up in a futuristic alien school. Imagine something like Galaxy High, but with more strange creatures and fewer chances for a peaceful nap. The school was packed with aliens from all over the universe, and they all seemed to think that Earth was this mysterious, almost mythical place. Of course, none of them really understood much about Earth. They got the basics: food, sports, culture, but everything was so off. You could tell that these aliens were highly intelligent, with their shiny gadgets and futuristic tech. But none of that really impressed Emily. She wasn't here to make them like her. She was just hoping to survive without embarrassing herself too much. Her first day was mostly spent trying to avoid the cafeteria disaster that was looming in the back of her mind. With no idea what kind of food alien species might find normal, she was pretty sure that a cosmic food fight was only a few bites away. Between the intimidating tech and the odd alien stares, Emily was already exhausted. But hey, if she was going to be the token human in an alien school, she was going to make it her show. After all, the only thing she needed to worry about was surviving without being turned into a human-shaped science experiment. When she finally got a moment to talk, Emily let out a small laugh as she thought about how this whole cultural exchange thing had been sold to her. Back on Earth, surviving gym class had been her biggest intellectual challenge. There were no galactic mysteries, no need to decipher alien languages or save the universe, just trying to avoid being picked last for dodgeball. She casually told one of the aliens that, back home, high school was more about surviving gym class than unraveling the mysteries of the universe. Emily couldn't help but throw in, "And just so you know, I'm here to make sure you don't think we all live in caves." Yeah, she was definitely the unlikely hero in this whole situation. The thing was, Emily wasn't fazed by anything here: tech, weird food, or alien intellects. She had one goal: just get through the day without causing an international incident. Emily stepped into the classroom, and immediately she was met with a sea of alien faces. Each one was different, of course. Some had scales, others had tentacles, and there were a few that looked like they belonged in a bad sci-fi movie. They all stared at her like she was some sort of rare specimen, which, to be fair, she kind of was. After all, humans weren't exactly common in this school. Some of the aliens whispered to each other, making comments about how primitive humans must be. Others seemed fascinated by her, thinking she might be some advanced species. Emily couldn't help but shake her head a little. She was the ambassador of humanity, but at that moment she was just hoping they didn't ask her to solve any complex math problems or understand alien technology. Honestly, Emily wasn't even sure how she was supposed to explain Earth culture to a room full of beings who could probably calculate pi to the 100th digit while riding a space scooter. The aliens, though, were eager to learn about Earth, or at least they acted like they were. The first topic on the table was food. Emily's stomach growled a little, and she couldn't help but think about how much she missed pizza. As the aliens looked at her expectantly, Emily decided to start with something simple: pizza. She figured it was the best way to explain Earth's complicated food culture without going into too much detail about things like nutrition or global food chains. Okay, pizza is like, what? Galactic fusion food, if you will. It's got all the basics: carbs, fat, cheese. What else do you need, right? Emily said with a shrug, trying her best to make it sound like Earth had some kind of sophisticated food scene. The aliens blinked at her, their faces completely blank, clearly not understanding a word of it. She could see some of them making Notes on their alien tablets, probably trying to figure out what cheese was. But hey, she wasn't about to give up just yet. Emily thought she'd try again, this time with Earth's most popular sport. Okay, fine. If pizza's too complicated. For you, Earth's biggest sport? Football. It's like intergalactic war, but with more running and less death. The words left her mouth before she could even stop them, and she immediately realized how ridiculous that sounded. Of course, the aliens didn't know what football was either. They looked at each other, confused. One alien raised a tentacle. Intergalactic war, it asked, a bit too seriously for Emily's liking. She quickly waved it off, trying to look confident. Yeah, you know, football. You've got teams, and they're fighting for the win. Except instead of spaceships and laser beams, it's just a ball and a lot of running around, she explained, trying to make it sound like the most basic thing in the universe. The aliens exchanged looks, their tentacles and antennas twitching as they tried to process her words. Emily just smiled to herself. She wasn't really sure they understood any of it, but at least she was giving it her best shot. After a few more awkward exchanges about Earth's food and football, the aliens seemed to be both fascinated and a little frustrated with Emily's explanations. She could tell that some of them were impressed by how confident she was, while others were downright annoyed that they couldn't quite grasp the simple concept she was explaining. And that's when it happened. One of the larger aliens, who looked like a walking pile of moving rocks, stood up with an air of superiority. "We propose a challenge," he boomed, his voice echoing through the room. "A school-wide challenge to test your intelligence. We will prove that no Earthling can outsmart our superior intellect." He threw a glance at Emily, probably thinking that, by calling her out, he was making some grand statement about alien superiority. Emily raised an eyebrow. "Oh yeah, like in those Earth movies where humans always win, right?" she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. She couldn't help herself. The whole thing was just too ridiculous. Here she was, a regular girl from Earth, about to face off against aliens who thought they were the smartest beings in the universe. She had seen enough movies to know how this would play out. Earth always wins, even when it seems impossible. And hey, if this was going to be her moment to shine, why not throw in a little sarcasm for fun? The aliens didn't seem to get the sarcasm, of course. They were too busy puffing up their egos, talking about their superior logic and technology. Emily, on the other hand, wasn't worried in the least. She had a plan. Or rather, she didn't have a plan. And that was the plan. "I've watched a million game shows," Emily muttered to herself, leaning back in her chair. "Just gotta act like I don't know anything. And let them mess up." She was good at pretending to be clueless, probably because she actually was. Sometimes, especially when it came to anything technical, but she wasn't about to let that stop her. Emily had a way of turning her cluelessness into an advantage. While the aliens were busy preparing whatever complex tests they had in mind, Emily smiled to herself. She wasn't here to prove she was smarter than them. No, she was here to outsmart them by making them think they had the upper hand. And if it worked, well, she'd be able to eat her way through the whole challenge, starting with a pizza if she could find one. The first test was ready to begin, and the aliens seemed pretty sure that no human would be able to figure it out. They wheeled in a strange, complicated-looking device, and Emily immediately felt a pang of nervousness. The thing looked like a mix between a blender, a laser gun, and one of those fancy 3D printers that she saw on TV once. There were flashing lights, glowing buttons, and wires hanging out of it like it was some kind of intergalactic Frankenstein machine. The aliens stood back, watching Emily with expectation. Their eyes narrowed, as if to say, "We've got this. Let's see how your tiny Earth brain handles this one." Emily, on the other hand, felt a little out of her depth. She wasn't exactly a genius when it came to alien technology. But then again, she didn't need to be. Emily had a strategy: pretend to be clueless and let the aliens think they're winning. She took a deep breath and looked at the device. There was one huge red button right in the middle, glowing like it was calling out to her. Well, this can't be good, she thought, but it didn't stop her. Emily slowly reached out and dramatically pressed the red button. The moment she did, sparks flew out from the machine in all directions, filling the room with flashing lights and a loud buzzing sound. The aliens jumped back, startled and confused. One of them, a smaller alien with tentacles instead of arms, got hit with a harmless beam from the device. The beam didn't do any damage, but it did turn his skin a bright purple. Emily blinked in exaggerated surprise, playing up the chaos. Yeah, totally. Just press the red button. That's always the solution, right? It's not like the red button is ever a bad idea, she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. She tried her best to look like she had no idea what she had just done, even though she knew exactly what was happening. The aliens were now staring at the device, trying to figure out how it had gone so wrong. Emily couldn't help but enjoy the moment. The machine continued to buzz and whir, shooting out more random beams and emitting strange noises. One alien tried to approach it, but then took a step back as a large puff of smoke poured out. The whole situation was pure chaos, and Emily was having the time of her life watching them struggle. She leaned back in her chair, pretending to be just as baffled as they were. The aliens exchanged confused looks, completely unable to fix the malfunctioning device. Emily flashed a quick wink to the room, as if to say, "I got this." She played the role of the clueless human to perfection, making it look like this whole disaster was an accident. The aliens were clearly baffled, and in their confusion, they didn't notice that Emily was actually the one pulling the strings. Eventually, after what felt like forever, the device stopped sparking, and the odd purple-colored alien slowly turned back to his normal shade. The room fell into an awkward silence as the aliens stared at the now seemingly harmless device. Emily just shrugged, giving them an innocent look. "Well, that was fun," she said, as if nothing out of the ordinary had just happened. Inside, she was grinning. The aliens had no idea that the whole thing had been her master plan all along. Emily had managed to turn their high-tech gadget into a total disaster, and they were so caught up in trying to figure out what went wrong that they didn't even realize they had been outsmarted by a simple push of a button. Emily couldn't help but feel a little proud of herself. After all, if there was one thing she knew, it was that sometimes you just had to roll with it and let the chaos unfold. The second test was about to start, and Emily couldn't help but feel a little more at ease. After the chaos with the alien device, she figured there was no way things could get worse. That was when the aliens proudly introduced their second challenge, a food tasting contest. Emily was immediately suspicious. The aliens, who were all looking way too excited, presented their delicacies, which didn't exactly look appetizing to her earthly eyes. The first dish was a glowing green goo that sloshed around in a strange, squishy bowl. It didn't look anything like food she'd ever seen, unless you counted the stuff you'd find in the back of your fridge after a month of forgetting about leftovers. The next plate was full of spongy purple meat that looked like it had been pulled straight from an alien swamp. The last dish was a liquid which shimmered and bubbled as though it came straight from the inside of a comet. Emily stared at it all, wondering how she could possibly survive this without causing a scene. She glanced around at the aliens, who were eagerly waiting for her to dive in. They clearly thought that no human could stomach their delicious food. Emily wasn't about to back down now. She had survived Earth's worst fast food options. How bad could alien cuisine be? With a deep breath, she sat down confidently at the table, ready to take on whatever these extraterrestrial chefs had thrown her way. The aliens stared at her with wide eyes, clearly waiting for her to react. Emily looked at the glowing goo, gave it an exaggerated sniff, and then nodded, as if to say, "Yep, this is what I expected." She scooped up a spoonful of the goo and and put it in her mouth, immediately making a face like she was about to vomit. It was the perfect mix of slimy and sour. The aliens looked on with concern, clearly thinking she was struggling to keep it down. Emily, however, couldn't stop herself from secretly enjoying how ridiculously awful it tasted. She chewed slowly, exaggerating her discomfort for maximum effect, then swallowed with a dramatic "Ugh!" One alien leaned forward and asked, "Is it too much for you, Earthling?" "Too much?" Emily replied, barely holding back a smirk. This is nothing. Back on Earth, we have something called spicy wings. You know, the ones where you don't read the warning label and end up burning your mouth off. Classic Earth experience. The aliens stared at her, completely confused. They had no idea what spicy wings were, but they were definitely intrigued by the idea that humans had food that could actually cause pain. Emily was more than happy to keep playing along with their misunderstanding. She picked up another spoonful of goo and pretended to consider it before tossing it into her mouth with exaggerated bravado. The next dish was the purple, spongy meat. Emily poked it with her fork, watching it jiggle. It didn't look too appetizing, but she was on a roll now. She took a bite, chewing slowly and pulling faces as if she had just bitten into a rubbery tire. The aliens watched in horror, thinking she was about to pass out from the taste. Emily couldn't help herself. She had to exaggerate a little. "Okay, now this one," she said, her voice dripping with fake enthusiasm. "This is exactly like those mystery meat burgers from Earth. You know, the ones that look like food, but end up making you question every life choice you've ever made. Classic." The aliens were still staring at her, their large eyes blinking. In confusion, they hadn't expected Emily to downplay the whole situation so casually. Emily, however, was having a great time. The more confused the aliens were, the more fun she had pretending to struggle. Finally, it was time for the last dish, the bubbling comet liquid. Emily eyed it with hesitation, but she wasn't going to back down now. She took a sip, trying to keep her face as neutral as possible. The liquid was cold and tasted like a combination of mint, metal, and something vaguely floral. It wasn't as bad as the goo or the meat, but it was definitely strange. Emily forced herself not to gag and just smiled at the aliens. "Ah, yes. This is just like a weird kombucha from Earth. You know, the kind that's so trendy, it makes you wonder if anyone actually likes it," she said, setting the glass down with a flourish. The aliens, who were still waiting for her to collapse from the pain of the food, looked at each other in confusion. Emily's face, which had been scrunching up in exaggerated disgust, was now a picture of calm. They seemed completely flustered by her casual attitude toward the bizarre food. You really can handle it?" one alien asked, still sounding unsure. Emily shrugged, acting as if it was no big deal. "Yeah, no big deal. You know, us, humans are pretty tough. We've eaten all kinds of crazy things. Ever tried a hot dog? It's a real test of strength." The aliens were still processing everything, looking more and more baffled by Emily's nonchalant attitude. They had thought they were serving up the most disgusting dishes they could find, but Emily had just taken it all in stride, as though nothing could faze her. Emily, of course, was secretly enjoying the absurdity of it all. What she had just eaten was probably the strangest food she would ever come across. But if it meant outsmarting the aliens and staying in one piece, she was all for it. The final test was announced, and Emily's stomach twisted in mild anxiety. After all the chaos with alien devices and bizarre food, she had to face something that the aliens were absolutely convinced no human could solve. A complex alien logic puzzle. They explained it to her with way too much confidence, assuming that their logic was far beyond anything a mere Earthling could understand. The aliens had already made up their minds. This was going to be the test that proved human intelligence couldn't compete with their superior minds. The puzzle, they claimed, was a logical conundrum so intricate that even their best minds could Barely solve it. Emily was handed a glowing holographic board where floating symbols shifted and swirled in strange patterns. It looked like a combination of chess, quantum physics, and a Rubik's Cube had just thrown a party. The aliens watched eagerly, and Emily could feel their eyes boring into her, their tentacles twitching in excitement. They were ready for the show, ready to see her fail. Emily, though, wasn't worried. In fact, she was more amused by the situation than anything. She didn't have the slightest clue how to solve the puzzle, but that was the beauty of it. She knew exactly what she was going to do. She stared at the board for a moment, trying to make it look like she was genuinely trying to figure it out. She furrowed her brow, pursed her lips, and gave a few exaggerated sighs of frustration. She murmured, tapping her chin as if deep in thought. The aliens watched closely, their faces a mix of curiosity and smugness. They were convinced they had her. Emily stretched out the moment as long as she could, giving them plenty of time to enjoy their little victory. She let her eyes wander over the symbols on the board, pretending to be utterly stumped. This is tricky," she said, her voice laced with fake confusion. She gave a long pause, letting them think they had her right where they wanted her. But then, without any warning, Emily reached out, tapped one of the glowing symbols with the tip of her finger, and nodded sagely. "Okay, I think I got it." She pushed a few more symbols around the board, as though she was moving pieces on a chessboard. The aliens watched in disbelief. Their confident smiles started to fade, replaced with confusion. "Wait, what? How?" one of the aliens asked, its antennae twitching nervously. The others remained silent, still processing what had just happened. Emily leaned back in her chair, acting like the whole thing had been a piece of cake. "Oh, come on, this is easy. You just have to find the pattern," she said, shrugging like it was the most obvious thing in the world. She could see the aliens' brains working overtime, trying to figure out what they missed, what they hadn't seen. "Okay, so it's like trying to figure out who ate the last slice of pizza, right?" Emily continued, her tone casual and confident. She could see the confusion in the aliens' faces as they tried to process her comparison. It's always the person who looks the most innocent, or the one who denies it the hardest. The aliens blinked, obviously lost. One of them, a scaly creature with 3 eyes, tried to speak up but then stopped, unsure how to respond. Emily wasn't concerned. The puzzle had a simple solution, one that was based on human logic, not alien logic. And as much as they prided themselves on being intellectually superior, Emily knew that sometimes the simplest solution was the best one. She glanced over at the board again, watching the symbols settle into place. Her solution had worked. The puzzle was solved, and it wasn't because she was some genius. No, it was because she understood the basics of patterns and logic. The aliens had overcomplicated things, thinking that they had to look for some high-level cosmic answer, when really all they had to do was look at the most obvious option. So, yeah, it's like when you're in a room full of people and someone denies they ate the last slice of pizza, Emily said with a grin. The one who says, "I didn't do it," the loudest, that's the one who's guilty. The aliens stared at her in stunned silence. Emily sat back and waited for their reactions. She knew this was the moment they'd either accept defeat or try to come up with some alien excuse as to why her solution wasn't valid. But for now, she just enjoyed the look on their faces. Finally, one of them spoke up, a bit hesitantly. But, how did you figure it out?" Emily shrugged, looking almost bored. "I mean, it's just logic. Sometimes the simplest solution is the right one. You don't need to complicate things, you know." The aliens stood in stunned silence, and Emily couldn't help but feel a little smug. She had just outsmarted an entire alien school, and the best part was they hadn't even realized it. They were so caught up in their complex calculations. and patterns that they never even thought to look at the basics. She could practically hear the wheels turning in their alien minds as they tried to process the fact that a human, someone they had considered to be primitive, had just solved their hardest puzzle in a matter of seconds. As the room fell into a quiet, awkward pause, Emily leaned forward and gave them one last smile. "I guess you aliens aren't always as smart as you think, huh?" The aliens were left speechless, their pride shattered. Emily had done it. She'd proven that sometimes the simplest solutions were the best, and all it took was a little bit of human ingenuity to turn their overcomplicated puzzle into a joke. She grinned to herself, already wondering what the next challenge would be, and how she could easily defeat that one too. The challenge was finally over, and the aliens were left in a state of stunned silence. Emily had completed each test with a mixture of charm, sarcasm, and just the right amount of confusion, enough to leave the entire alien school baffled and speechless. It was clear that their intellectual superiority, which they had prided themselves on so much, had taken a major hit. Not only had Emily outsmarted them, but she had done it with a level of casualness that made it seem almost easy. It was like they had been outplayed by the underdog in a movie, and they didn't know how to handle it. One of the aliens, the one who had originally proposed the challenge, stood up slowly. He was a tall, reptilian creature with glowing eyes and skin that shimmered like a precious gem. His posture, once filled with confidence, now looked deflated. The moment he opened his mouth, Emily could practically hear the gears grinding in his mind as he prepared to admit defeat. "Well," the alien began, his voice a little more hesitant than before, "it seems we were wrong to underestimate you. Earthling." He gave Emily an awkward nod, his tone begrudging but resigned. "You have won." The rest of the alien school, still trying to come to terms with what had just happened, remained silent. It was like they were collectively recovering from the blow to their egos. Emily, however, was already leaning back in her chair, her arms casually crossed, a small smile tugging at the corner of her lips. She was basking in the glory of her unlikely victory, and she wasn't about to let them off easy. She pushed herself up and stood tall in front of the room, her expression smug and triumphant. "I mean, I did warn you, Earthlings are basically the best at everything," she said, her voice dripping with sarcastic confidence. It was the perfect line to cap off her victory, playful, cheeky, and just the right amount of snark. The aliens stared at her, clearly unsure whether they should be impressed or angry. But before they could say anything else, Emily shrugged. "What?" she added, her tone almost casual. "I'm just here for the football." The silence in the room hung heavy for a moment as the aliens tried to process what had just happened. They had just been bested by a human, someone they considered inferior, and not only had she won, but she had done it in a way that made them look foolish. It was a blow to their pride, and they weren't sure how to recover from it. Then, one by one, the aliens started to slowly clap. At first, it was just a few hesitant claps, as if they weren't entirely sure whether they should be applauding or not. But then, as the reality of what had just occurred set in, the applause grew louder. It was awkward, but it was still applause. Emily couldn't help but grin at their discomfort. She didn't need their praise, but it felt good to know. She had earned their respect, even if it was begrudgingly given. She waved her hand in a mock gesture of humility. "Oh, you guys didn't have to do that," she said with a smirk, "but hey, I appreciate it. Maybe next time we can do this over a nice Earth-style pizza?" The aliens paused, exchanging confused looks. They were still struggling to understand exactly how they had been outsmarted by a human, but the seed of respect had been planted. They didn't know it yet, but they had just learned a valuable lesson. Earthlings, with all their quirks, were capable of surprising the universe in ways the aliens had never imagined. And while Emily wasn't about to start a diplomatic mission to become the galaxy's greatest genius, she had just proven that sometimes a little humor, a bit of sarcasm, and some basic logic could go a long way. As the applause continued, Emily couldn't help but take it all in. This was her moment. She had started out as the reluctant exchange student, unsure of what she was doing in this bizarre school, and now she was the hero of the day. Unintentionally, of course, but a hero nonetheless. She stepped back, giving the alien crowd a mock bow. Thanks, she said with a wink. I'll be here all week. Don't forget to tip your waiters." The aliens, still somewhat confused by her humor, continued to clap, their reactions still a mix of admiration and bewilderment. But Emily didn't care. She had just outsmarted them, and that felt pretty damn good. With one last glance around the room, she gave a satisfied nod. "Now, if someone could point me to the nearest pizza place, that'd be great. I'm starving." The aliens, still clapping, had no idea what she was talking about, but Emily didn't mind. She was the unlikely hero of the day, and she'd earned it. The day had turned out far differently than Emily had ever imagined. She had come into this alien school as a confused, reluctant participant in a cultural exchange program. She was just a regular human girl, thrown into a world where the inhabitants were far more advanced than anything Earth had to offer. The whole thing had seemed like an accident, and she fully expected to spend the entire time awkwardly dodging alien questions and weird foods. Yet here she was, crowned the unexpected hero of the day. The aliens had no choice but to acknowledge it. Emily had outsmarted them at every turn. She had taken on their most complex puzzles, their bizarre food, and their high-tech devices with a mix of sarcastic confidence and playful misdirection. And despite the aliens' superior intellect, it was Emily, the primitive earthling, who had emerged victorious. Now she was more than just a human in an alien school. She had become a legend. The aliens, who had once doubted her, now saw her in a completely new light. They didn't just think of her as some strange being from an insignificant planet. They were starting to recognize the value of human wit, resourcefulness, and, most importantly, humor. Emily had flipped the script on them in ways they hadn't expected, and now they were left with a new appreciation for Earthlings. No longer was she the confused, naive girl who didn't understand alien tech. Now, she was someone who had outsmarted the entire school and walked away unscathed, all while cracking jokes and making it look easy. But despite the newfound status, Emily wasn't about to let it go to her head. She was still the same sarcastic, down-to-earth girl who had signed up for this whole mess in the first place, with zero expectations of success. She was still the girl who just wanted to get through the day without accidentally offending anyone, or, getting zapped by some alien laser. She hadn't planned on becoming a hero, let alone the hero of an alien school, and she wasn't about to start acting like it was some grand accomplishment. As the aliens began to treat her with a newfound respect, offering her high fives, handshakes, and a variety of other forms of alien congratulations that she was still trying to understand, Emily kept things as simple as she could. She smiled and nodded, accepting their applause with the same casual attitude she'd maintained throughout the day. She wasn't about to get caught up in the excitement. She had things to do, like finding something to eat and getting back to Earth, where she didn't have to deal with aliens offering her bizarre food or using confusing math puzzles to test her. The aliens had gathered around her, eager to hear her thoughts on the day's events. They were still amazed by her ability to navigate their tests so effortlessly. Emily looked around at their eager faces and gave a small shrug. "What? It's just a regular Tuesday for a human," she said, winking. A regular Tuesday involving alien challenges, insane puzzles, and weird goo. Totally normal." The aliens laughed, or at least they tried to. Some of them were still working out how Earth humor worked, but Emily didn't mind. She wasn't here to give them a lesson in sarcasm. She had done what she set out to do, and now she was ready to move on. As the applause finally began to die down, Emily glanced around at the aliens and gave them one last smirk. "So now that I'm an intergalactic hero and all that," she said, her voice light and casual, "can someone point me to the nearest pizza place? I'm starving." The aliens stared at her, blank-faced. They clearly had no idea what pizza was, but that was fine. Emily wasn't here to explain everything. She wasn't here to teach them about Earth's greatest food invention. She just wanted something familiar, something that tasted like home. The aliens, unsure of what exactly pizza was, shuffled awkwardly, but one of them, who had been hanging back throughout the day, finally spoke up. "We do have a place where Earth food can be replicated," he said hesitantly. "It is not exactly pizza, but it should suffice." Emily raised an eyebrow. "Not exactly pizza? You're killing me here." But despite the awkwardness of the moment, Emily couldn't help but smile. This entire experience had been ridiculous, but it had also been surprisingly fun. She had gone from the out-of-place Earthling to the one who had beaten the aliens at their own game, all while making a joke out of everything that went wrong. The aliens may not have fully understood her sarcasm, but Emily was fine with that. She'd played her part, and she'd done it in a way that no one would forget anytime soon. As the alien led her toward the food replication area, Emily glanced back at the crowd of aliens still lingering around her, their expressions filled with awe and respect. She had won them over, not by outsmarting them with superior intelligence, but by staying true to herself, by using her quick wit, her humor, and her unshakable confidence to turn the whole thing into one big joke. And that, Emily realized with a grin, was how Earthlings truly ruled the universe. Not through their intelligence, not through their strength, but through their ability to laugh at everything, even when it seemed impossible. "Let's get that pizza," she muttered to herself, already planning how she would explain pizza to these aliens. Because if there was one thing she knew for sure, it was that pizza was going to be her new, universal peace offering.